spatial distribution maps. So a spatial distribution map usually is shown as a chloropleth map, or it could be a map where we've got a key and we've got some dots along the side, or we've got some patterns that we can see. But basically a spatial distribution map is going to be a map that has patterns on it. All right, so with this question here, this spatial distribution is where girls are less educated than boys, and so it's a spatial distribution question is basically asking you to look for the patterns on the map and explain why the pattern exists. So when we look at girls being less educated than boys, you know, that does tie directly in with well-being, where girls tend to be less educated than boys, and that's got a few reasons. So the first is there could be cultural study restrictions that are enforced. There could be reasons where, you know, the idea is that the men are the ones that are going to be earning the money, in the majority of the money in that country. So it makes more sense, if you don't have a lot of money to spend on education, it makes more sense to educate the men rather than educating the women, simply because there isn't equal pay. So the men will support the family later in life. There's also a lot of very stereotypical gender roles in many nations, where the women stay home and raise the family and the men go out to work. You'll notice that the wealthier nations, Australia, United States, Europe, the wealthy regions tend to have higher education and more equal education between men and women. So that's a pattern that you might note. You might note that the less wealthy regions, there is a huge disparity between male and female secondary education levels. And again, you might talk about, there might be some legal restrictions. There might have been some war that was happening where females were not allowed to be, religious reasons where females were not allowed to be educated, or cultural education. There might be dangers about sending women to school. The women might be collecting water, because in some African nations, women can travel up to 8 hours just to collect the family's water for the day. So they definitely don't have time to gather water later. So, you know, you can have a look at the patterns and explain the patterns that you are seeing. Remember, explain means cause and effect. So what is causing these richer areas to have more educated women, or an equal distribution of men and women being educated, and what is the impact of that? So if there is an unequal distribution of men and women being educated, or boys and girls being educated, we're going to see a greater pay gap, because women might not have those opportunities in the workforce, which means it's going to be a lot harder for them to break those stereotypes. We might see higher mortality rates of women, because they don't have that access to medication, and they don't have the money to pay for their education. They might not know what they need to do. They might not be able to read the labels of medications. So there's a huge reliance on educated people around them. We know that knowledge is power. So if we give knowledge to children, then they are more powerful, and they're going to be more engaged in their local democracy and voting and fighting for equal rights and climate change and all those important issues. We always look at, with every question, if you get stuck, ask yourself, are there social reasons why these distribution and the pattern exists? Are there economic reasons? Are there environmental reasons why these patterns exist? So always think to yourself those three things. Are there political reasons as well? You can ask yourself. So that is all a spatial distribution map is going to be asking you. What's the pattern that you're seeing? Explain that pattern that you are seeing. What are the impacts of it in the long term if this pattern does not change?